My mother-in-law picked up the ribbon-cutting scissors before I had even finished my welcome speech, turned to the 20-some people gathered in my new office parking lot, and told them that she was the reason I had ever caught a baby in the first place. My name is Renata. My husband is Matteo. My mother-in-law is Carol, and in the 9 years I have known her, I have learned that she does not celebrate a milestone so much as absorb it, quietly, at the edges, until one day it belongs to her and you are the one who has to prove otherwise. I used to think that was just how some mothers-in-law were. By the day I opened my own midwifery practice, I no longer thought it was harmless, and I no longer let it happen without a plan. I did not grow up around medicine. I grew up the daughter of a long-haul trucker and a school cafeteria worker, and the closest thing to a birth I witnessed before I was 22 was a nature documentary. I found midwifery by accident, doing intake paperwork at a birth center to pay rent during nursing prerequisites, and I fell in love with it the way you fall into work that finally feels like yours. I spent 4 years as an apprentice under a direct entry midwife named Dolores Ferreira, 40-some births as her hands and then my own. 200 hours of coursework logged by hand in a green ledger Dolores made every apprentice keep, and a state licensing exam I paid for myself out of 3 years of overnight shift differentials. Nobody in my family had ever delivered a baby. I kept every log page, every exam receipt, every client intake form, because that is simply how Dolores trained you, and because some part of me, even then, sensed I might need the paper trail for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine. I met Matteo the year I finished my apprenticeship, at a friend's barbecue where he asked what a midwife actually does and then listened to the entire answer without checking his phone once. Carol, when we were introduced a month later, asked whether midwifery was the thing before you get a real hospital job, and smiled like she'd made a joke instead of a diagnosis. I laughed it off. Matteo apologized for her afterward, the way he always did, and I told him it was fine because it was one comment, and one comment is easy enough to forgive. It stopped being one comment. Over the years it became a running theme at every holiday. My practice was a hobby that got serious. My continuing education conferences were little trips, and when I finally caught my first solo birth as a fully licensed midwife, 2 years ago, Carol's contribution to the family group chat was a single line, "Proud of you for trying something so risky," followed by an article about hospital birth statistics. I saved that message without deciding to. By then some part of me had already started keeping things on purpose, so when I finally saved enough, after 4 years of building a client list out of a spare bedroom, to lease the converted garage behind the old hardware store and turn it into a real practice, my own exam room, my own waiting area, my own name on the lease, I told exactly 5 people before the open house. Matteo. My parents. Dolores. My office manager, Priya. And, 2 weeks out, because Matteo insisted it would look strange not to, Carol. The trouble started the week of setup, which is the quiet, unglamorous part where you arrange the waiting chairs and hang the certificates and try not to think too hard about whether anyone will actually show up. I had scheduled the furniture delivery for Tuesday morning, just me, Priya, and the delivery crew. Carol arrived anyway, unannounced, carrying a tote bag of what she called finishing touches, a lace runner for the intake desk, a candle, and a stack of business cards from a doula certification she'd let lapse 11 years earlier, in case anyone wants to know who to really talk to about the family side of things. She did not stop at finishing touches. I found her rearranging the certificate wall, the one where my apprenticeship completion letter from Dolores hung beside my state license, and she had taken my license down and replaced it, dead center, with a Browning newspaper clipping from 1991 about a home birth workshop she had once attended as an audience member. "It's more of a story this way," she said, brightly, when I asked. I put my license back. She said she was just trying to help, and then, while I was untacking the scale, changed the label on the intake folder rack so the top shelf read Carol's Corner, a shelf that held nothing of hers at all. Priya reprinted the correct label without comment, but gave me a look on the way out that told me she'd clocked it too. I told myself it was a one-time overstep, born of a mother watching her son's wife build something entirely, unassailably her own. I was wrong about that. Within the week, the county's small business paper runs a monthly feature called New in Town, and their reporter, a careful, unhurried man named Owen Vance, had reached out through the Chamber of Commerce to set up a phone interview about the practice. The chamber gave Owen my cell number directly, but Owen told me afterward that he had first spoken to a very warm woman who introduced herself as the midwife's mother-in-law and offered to fill in some of the early history before Owen and I ever connected. That warm woman had apparently told Owen that she had personally encouraged me into the field after a home birth she'd attended decades earlier, that she'd practically apprenticed alongside me during my training years, and that the ledger of births I kept was really a family project. I have never attended a birth with Carol in the room. I trained under Dolores, logged every hour in a green notebook Dolores still keeps a duplicate of, and I told Owen so, on the record, as evenly as I could manage. Owen, professional to the last, said only that he would note the clarification, but I heard the pause before he said it, the pause of a man recalculating how much of a phone call to print. I called Mateo from the parking lot outside my own new office and told him what his mother had done. He was quiet for a second, then said what he always says, that she means well and doesn't think it through. I told him I didn't need her to mean well. I needed her to stop rewriting 4 years of apprenticeship into a story where she was the reason for it. He said he'd talk to her. He did talk to her. It did not work because it never works, and because by then a small, cold part of me had already pulled Dolores's green ledger, my exam receipts, and every relevant text message into a single folder on my desktop, not as a metaphor, an actual folder, sitting quietly next to the client scheduling software. 10 days before the open house, the chamber hosted a small preview mixer for a dozen local business owners and 2 other midwives from a neighboring county, the kind of quiet evening where referral relationships get built before the public ever walks in. Carol came in a blazer she'd clearly bought for the occasion and worked the room like she had built the practice herself. I watched her tell one of the visiting midwives that she had basically raised Renata in this work, touch the woman's arm, and steer her gently toward my least experienced hire, a new apprentice named B, describing Bia as the one Renata's really been mentoring, very personal to the family. I watched her tell the chamber's small business liaison, within my earshot, that she hoped I wasn't taking on too much too fast for a first year, a comment aimed less at the liaison than at the 2 midwives standing 3 feet away. The liaison, unbothered, said the client waitlist alone suggested otherwise and moved on to refill her coffee. I did not correct Carol in front of the room. I went home and added the exchange, from memory, to the folder, along with the date and who else had been standing there to hear it. By the morning of the open house, the folder held 11 items, my apprenticeship completion letter signed by Dolores, 4 years of exam receipts and continuing education certificates, a photograph of the swapped certificate wall clipping, a screenshot of the proud of you for trying something so risky message from 2 years back, a longer message from 8 months earlier where Carol told Mateo, not knowing I would see it forwarded, that my practice was a phase that's gone on a bit long for a family with a real breadwinner, a copy of Dolores's green ledger's first page in Dolores's own handwriting, and Owen's voicemail, still saved, repeating Carol's claim about apprenticing alongside me. I had not built the folder to use it that day. I had built it, if I'm honest, the way you build anything defensive, hoping you never need it, keeping it anyway just in case. The open house drew a good crowd, closer to 30 people than the 20 I'd expected on a weekday morning, word having traveled a little from Owen's piece, which had run with my correction intact and a note that accounts of the practice's early history differ among family members. I was standing near the certificate wall, mid-conversation with Priya, when I heard someone tap the ceremonial scissors against the microphone stand Priya had set up for my 2 minutes of remarks, 40 minutes ahead of schedule. Carol did not ask anyone. She simply picked up the cordless microphone from its stand, tapped it twice, and once the small crowd had quieted out of politeness, told them that she was so proud of the woman my son married. that she had practically walked beside Renata through every year of her training, encouraging her when it would have been easier not to, and that the ledger displayed under glass by the intake desk, Dolores's green notebook, open to its first loud birth, was a project the two of us kept together back when she was just starting out. A few people clapped, the reflexive kind. Dolores, who had come for the ribbon cutting and was standing near the door, went very still, which for Dolores is the equivalent of a gasp. Owen Vance, notebook still in his bag but pen already out, was watching from the back. I walked to the microphone stand. I did not raise my voice, because I have learned that raising your voice gives people a reason to react to the tone instead of the content. I thanked Carol for the kind words and asked to borrow the microphone for the remarks that had, in fact, been scheduled. She handed it over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and stepped back half a step, close enough to still be in frame, which I think was the point. I told the room the real story in under 4 minutes, because a folder gives you practice deciding what actually matters. I said I'd trained for 4 years under a midwife named Dolores Ferreira, and I asked Dolores, standing right there by the door, to raise her hand, which she did, a little startled. I said the ledger under the glass was Dolores's own training ledger, in Dolores's own handwriting, and I turned to the first page and read the date of my very first log birth, 3 years before Carol had ever mentioned midwifery to me at all. I read, without naming who'd said it, the message from 8 months ago calling my practice a phase that's gone on a bit long, and then said that I understood not everyone believes in what you're building before it's finished, and that's all right, because I built it anyway, on my own schedule, with my own overnight shift differentials, 1 apprenticeship hour at a time. I did not read all 11 items. I didn't need to. I had learned, by then, that you only have to open the folder far enough for people to understand there's a folder. Carol's face did something complicated, not quite anger, not quite shame, something closer to a woman recalculating an audience. Dolores was the first to start clapping, and it wasn't the reflexive kind. Owen Vance was writing fast. Carol set down the coffee she'd been holding, told Mateo, quietly enough that I only heard because I was 2 feet away, that she had a headache coming on, and left before the ribbon was even cut. Mateo found me afterward, standing by the certificate wall no one but Dolores and I would ever fully appreciate as its own kind of art, and said he was sorry, and that he'd finally understood, watching it happen in real time, what talking to her had never actually fixed. I told him I didn't need an apology on her behalf. I needed him to have seen it, which he finally had. The practice took 4 new client intakes by the end of that week, including one from the visiting midwife Carol had tried to redirect toward B. Owen's follow-up piece ran under the headline "The Ledger Tells It Straight" and didn't mention Carol by name once, which felt like its own kind of verdict. Carol and I have spoken twice since, both brief, both careful, the kind of careful that comes after someone has learned there is a folder and decided not to test what else is in it. Mateo says she's quieter about my work now, not warmer, just quieter, and for the first time in 9 years, quieter is enough for me.